Welcome back to Coming Together Interrelationships of Evolutionary Astrology Teachings. My name is Bradley Narragon, and today, I'm pretty excited. I've got a special guest joining us today, Adam Madison. Welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. AKA Osiris.
Osiris, thank you. And
It's all
so,
good.
um, Osiris, I guess for our listeners, I'll just say that we go back a ways, maybe a decade or so.
No, 2015.
20. Thank you. I was trying to remember.
It was the 2015 NORWAC. I remember because it's my first and only NORWAC, and it was highly influential in my life.
Yeah, that was a good Norwalk. And yeah, so okay, 8 years, a little over 8 years ago.
Yeah, like a Venus cycle.
Nice. I had not considered that. Thank you. Yeah. Huh. So yeah, there was that that same. It would have been the same Venus
hmm
retrograde in Leo that year, right? That's what?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. And then the Venus conjunction in Leo in the summer. Is that how it works? I think so.
When you mention the conjunction, do you mean the Sun Venus conjunction?
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, there's always the inferior conjunction. I don't remember exactly how many days. I think it's like 21 days. I'm reading Aaron Sullivan's retrogrades book right now, which is absolutely phenomenal. I highly recommend that to everyone. It's very, very detailed on all the retrogrades.
Nice. I and I'll just say, like, one of the things I love talking to you astrology is, like, so over the years we've talked on and off. We had some gaps. But we've been connecting, a little more frequently over the last couple of years. And we always have such a good time talking astrology that was the inspiration for the podcast. I was like, we should just do what we do, get on a call and talk to each other and record it, because so much good stuff comes out of it. And here we are.
Yeah, thank you for taking the initiative. As I was mentioning before we started recording, are you comfortable if I mention your chart a little bit?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was mentioning your Mars in Capricorn. So we both of us have really strong Marses. I'm Mars in Aries and he's Mars in Capricorn. So it makes sense that he would lead the way in terms of, like, I always view you as a mentor. When I refer you to people in my life, I'm like, oh yeah, my mentor, Bradley Naragan. Is that how I pronounce your last name right? Naragan?
Narragon,
Naragon. I'm sorry.
or
So
sometimes Narragan. Yeah.
okay. And I mentioned that because I, even though it's like an informal mentorship, you've never like casted down, like, study this XYZ. Like that's always that's always how I thought it. Because so our first meeting was at the NORWAC. You were hosting the lecture on the planetary nodes, and of course I heard about the moon's nodes, but I thought the planetary nodes, this is strange. And personally, I was at another lecture first. It was like a lecture on the eighth and 12th houses, and I was like, oh, I don't resonate with this. So I just got up and left, and I felt really embarrassed about it. And then I went to your lecture, and I was like a little late, and I was like, I didn't really understand anything at all. I was like, but my Mercury and Sag, I like that. I was like, oh, I'll catch up. Competition, I'll catch up. And I don't remember how, but I got a chance to talk to you after the lecture, and it was like, can you talk about what you were talking about? Like, oh, I had a couple of pointed questions. I had some specific questions, and I still didn't understand what you were talking about, but I did eventually catch up. And your recent podcast, I don't know if you've completed them yet, but when you talk about the signs and that certain signs are going to have like the inner planets in certain sign, in certain
Oh, right.
there's the
Yeah.
planetary nodes in certain
Yeah.
signs, I was like, wow, this is truly revolutionary astrology. Like yeah, and it's still on my to-do list to memorize that. I want to memorize all of that because that's kind of how OCD I get if something's really that important.
Right on. Yeah, I just finished all 360 slides, so I can finally do like a stop motion video where you just like see them move through the whole year.
Wow.
So I'm really, yeah, I've been kind of like wanting to share that for many years, so get to share that now finally. And then if like I don't know, like 40 slides got like something happened to them, so I just had a very Mercury retrograde. I had to go back and like move all like the because it's like every one I'm moving these little image files. So
Wow, that's
I
really awesome.
rebuilt those, so I just it's technically completed this morning.
Wow, respect. Yeah,
Yeah.
I suppose this not directly. I guess Mercury station retrograde kind of opposite your Venus, your Pisces pile up. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, it did.
that makes
It's, yeah,
sense.
yeah.
That's awesome. Because I'm terribly like neglectful is the word at like image, like you moving images in PowerPoint. Like, no, I'm very like what I plan to do for the next year, because I'm going to have my solar return Venus. I know this is a little in the weeds, but my solar return Venus is going to be on my ascendant. And I'm like, I need to get better at marketing and publishing and learning
Hmm.
those like nuances, the visual realm that comes naturally to the Pisces energy. I don't have strong Pisces energy. I just have my North Node there. But to kind of veer this back into a more holistic level of why I feel like our conversations are so fruitful, because it's very much so. I started out as a modern psychological astrologer, like the first 5 or 6 years of my informal career, and then I was introduced to Chris Brennan and traditional astrology. And it was 2017 was when I was introduced to that. And he makes a case. He kind of pleads to you to say, hey, go for like at least a year without the outer planets. Like just try it. Like they're there if you want to come back to them. And I
Hmm.
was like, okay, because I was being selfish. I was like, no, I'm just gonna do both. I'm gonna synthesize traditional and modern. And I still consider myself the synthesis of traditional and modern. But I did that and I was like, all right, I still have them in like my back pocket. They're like wild cards for me, especially if someone's between like the ages of 37 to 45, where
Hmm.
they're gonna have, Pluto, natal Pluto square transiting Pluto, natal Uranus opposite transiting Uranus, and or natal Neptune square natal Neptune. I think that's really important, like midlife crisis stuff. I'll just take a peek at that. But in general, I eschew them except when I talk to someone else that I respect and love, like yourself, where I'm like, oh, okay, I get to plug back into modern psychological mode. And recently, I still want to continue building on evolutionary astrology, but I have a little background in evolutionary astrology, mostly through Mark Jones and yourself. And I finally bought Jeffrey Wolf Green, one of Jeffrey Wolf Green's book on, I forget exactly which one it was. It was like the last book or the second to last book he did. And I was like, oh, okay, because I'm really attracted to techniques and modalities. Like this is step by step. This is how you look at a chart. So I only just had pieces, bits and pieces. Like, oh, okay, the nodes are really important, and the Pluto is the soul. Like, okay, I resonate with that. But to really get into the weeds and build it up brick by brick is still something that I'm excited to do. And I think I don't want to speak for you. You can clarify, but for yourself, I think it's like illuminating for you to be like, oh, what are all these, why is he always talking about the dignities of the planets and planets ruling this and mutual reception? Like, why is that so important?
I love hearing about it because like, I mean that's obviously one of the things I enjoy is like I don't know traditional astrology at all, so whenever you bring in that, I'm like, oh, okay, and it makes sense. What you're saying makes sense usually, and it's another, it's something to consider, and yeah, I love it. And I mean, what you'll how you'll interpret a day and could be fairly different how I might interpret a day. But like that doesn't mean like one's right, one's wrong or something, like it's like there's all
Exactly.
these different threads and currents going on and what we might experience. Um, yeah, going back to the planetary nodes briefly, like, like when I first got into astrology, this is something I realized really recently was, um, I had, I, I met somebody and then like, I we got together and um I like I dropped out of college to study astrology, and then and then I quit my job and moved to her grandparents' farm, and it was like her four sisters and grandma and grandpa and her mom on this farm. And my parents were too happy with me at the moment. because I had been a senior in college at the time, and I was like, this is all that makes sense right now. And so, we would talk astrology, tarot all the time, and just hang out for that summer. And one of the conversations that was kind of happening with one of the sisters I remember was like she was saying something about Libra. She thought like Libras are so obsessive, and I was like, and then eventually I started getting on this trip where I was like, don't you think it's like, because Pluto's in Libra, that those people who have this like obsession, like they probably have Pluto in Libra too, right? And she said no. She was like, no, like I just think that like I've noticed like all Libra suns are like are certain, have a certain kind of obsessive quality to them in relationship. And it was literally like a month ago where I was revisiting that conversation in my head, and I was like, we were both right. I realized like I think there's like hear me out here. Here's my thought is like on one hand, like I had some validity in that because I do think that like outer planet presences will color the experience of the sign. And so there's this subjective lens that we're looking through. But on the other hand, I realized that like with the planetary nodes, Libra suns have a lot of their inner planet nodes in Scorpio. So, and the majority of Libras have south node of Venus and south node of Mars in Scorpio. So, it's kind of funny because I guess like so to say that, it's almost like saying if you want to like really experience the true Libra archetype, maybe like look at someone who has like Libra moon, Libra rising. But when we talk about a Libra sun, there's going to be these Scorpio undercurrents because they're coming from these south nodes in Scorpio, personal planets. So that was kind of like, wow, we were both, she was right, but she didn't know why, but she was right. And so that was kind of the thing, was like we both had this awareness, but we didn't know like exactly what was going on. And so for me, like years later, it's kind of like, holy crap, I finally like have an answer to this conundrum that like and you're probably like this too, a lot, where it's like I can sense if something is like no, like, or it's like yes, this is truth that resonates, this is the archetype, or it's like something else is influencing it there, but I may not know exactly what's going on.
Uh-huh.
But so yeah, that's a little fun story there about the
Yeah, I find that interesting to first contextualize this, that for one, I think we would both agree when I say that astrology is a language, and that different modalities or traditions of astrology are different languages or different dialects of the same language at best. So I've always avoided this sort of tribalism that, oh, my style is better than yours. No, I'm really saggy, where I want to speak fluently in as many styles as I can. So I'm going to learn Uranian astrology one of these days. That's one of the reasons I want to dig down more into evolutionary astrology more, and medieval astrology and Jyotish astrology and even Chinese astrology. There's a book on my Amazon, because the second part is there are so many synchronicities. Like I do feel intuitively that if you stick to the principles of whatever tradition or traditions that you learn from, you're going to find more or less the same key signs, the key patterns, attractor patterns, as Jason Hawley likes to say. I love that term. The same attractor patterns of the chart. And so that, I think that's what you said just perfectly illustrates that. And from my own perspective, when I look at Libras, Sun in Libras and Sun in Aquariuses, and I'm sorry, Bradley, Sun in Aquarius, I'm always hard on those two signs, because in traditional astrology, the sun is considered in fall and in detriment in those signs. And so I look at that as, okay, the sun represents identity and vitality and health, and knowing thyself irrespective of anything else. I my essential beingness, my essential goodness. Where in Libra and Aquarius, the sun is on a search for itself. Like, who am I? Oh, I
Mm.
have to find myself in relation to others. For Libra, it's the other in one-on-one, and in Aquarius, it's the other through groups. Like, oh, so it's kind of like
Mm.
in like Eastern philosophy, it's like not this, not that. Like when you're looking for the self with the capital S, it's like, oh, I'm not this, I'm not that, I'm not that. So you kind of okay, so I'm not all these things, so I must be this then, because that's the only thing that's left. And so that's how I because I have known a sun in Libras where they are like everything is charming. Why is everything charming? And you're always trying to influence things, and you're always trying to be like the navigator of social relationships. Like, can you just chill out? Like, who are you if we separate you from the persona? And then it's like, oh, a lot of times they don't know who they are because they haven't developed that. They develop that through their other self. So I think that's fascinating.
Mm.
And to throw even a little bit more on that, any sun in Libra is of course going to have their progress chart. Their progress sun is going to enter Scorpio within no
Mm.
later than 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I hadn't considered that. That's a good point.
oh,
Huh.
thank you.
And I'm going to put you on the spot, Osiris, for a second. If you're listening out there, Osiris is a great teacher. Like, seriously, I really appreciate, you're just a natural born teacher. Let's just say that. And
Oh,
very,
thank you.
very knowledgeable. And as you can tell, always interested into to learning more and picking up more. It's definitely worth checking out, what you're doing, what he's doing out there. So, there's a little plug there for you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm 34. That's young in astrology terms. I'm going to be around for a while. I'm not going anywhere. I'm on a 10, 20, 30-year journey of pure love. Of I just love this. I love this, and I'll always love it. And so I look at the things that like things like this, like they choose you. Astrology chose me. I guess I'll get into my background a little bit. So I never was introduced to astrology until I was like 20, 23 or 24. And I don't, it started innocuously. There was like some kind of book on my mom's bookshelf, like astrology, the space age science. And I read it and I was like, this sounds like bullshit. Like, because I'm very like scientific in my mindset. I have a psychological background, but I'm always like, okay, show me the evidence. Where are your sources? If I have an ex who would always make fun of me because every time she would say something, I'd be like, okay, where did you get it from? What's your source? So that's how I am. But that sparked my curiosity, and then I don't know how I lucked into this, but I read Liz Green and Howard Sasportis's The Development of the Personality and
Mm.
Dynamics of the Unconscious, which
Mm.
to this day are still two of my top favorite books of all time. Because I was like, all right, I know psychology. I'll know quickly if this is bullshit or not. And like within the first chapter, they talk about how you can use someone's sun and moon signs, as the sun represents the father and the moon represents the mother. And so, okay, the sun in Aries, the sun in Leo, they're likely going to have a strong father figure where they're warm and generous, and they especially with women, they're going to be attracted to strong men, and men themselves are going to be more natural leaders who kind of like do what they want, but it like works out and people like kind of follow their lead. And with the moon, men will project their moon onto their women partners. And so in my case, I have a Cancer moon, and while I think I'm a pretty emotional man, I feel like there's kind of a limit to how emotional a man can express a pure feminine archetype like the Cancer moon. And so even though I feel like I'm pretty in touch with my emotions, I inevitably attract extremely emotional women. And I'm just like, oh, okay. I love this classic like projection. Sometimes I kind of now as I am a counseling astrologer more, I try to shy away from terminology or astrologies, although it's still like my natural habitat. It's where I like to swim. But I find you get so much value out of just that alone of the archetypes. Of like another example, I guess this is a little far field, but in October, late October, we're going to have Mars in Scorpio with Mercury in Scorpio conjoining themselves.
Mm.
The moon, the sun is a little bit behind, but then
Mm.
there'll be a moon Jupiter opposition, moon Jupiter and Taurus opposite Mercury and Mars. And when I was writing the horoscope for that, I was like, I come back, I learned this from Liz Green and Sportis, where they talk about oppositions and squares, especially hard aspects, where you tend to, you keep the good part, whatever you feel like is the good part, the part you're more comfortable with, and then you project, you deny the difficult part in yourself. And so you meet it
Mm,
in the environment and you call it fate.
mm, mhm,
and and interestingly, I believe I don't know where this aspect doctrine came from. Sometimes I read too much and I don't quite know my source. But have you heard like oppositions are the element of Libra? Like Mars, like squares are the element of the planet of Mars, the energy of Mars. Like squares are boxing matches, and
mm.
oppositions are you're looking for the balance in the opposition and the two poles. It's like a Libra of Venus energy. Um,
That makes
so
sense.
I know I'm rambling, but I like whenever there's like hard aspects, to kind of put a bow on this, like in your personal chart, especially if you're learning
Uh-huh.
astrology or you're reading someone else's chart. That's how I test. Because I think one of our previous conversations, we were talking about how we both will like test the chart for sensitivities, like how sensitive the people are to the energies. And so, okay, I'll look at a
Mhm.
square opposition. Which part of this are you keeping? Which part of it do you think is good? Right.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, there's a lot of places we could go from this. Uh, yeah, the boxing match. I mean, right, with the squares, it's like, yeah. I mean, I think one person that I know kind of talks with, and I've thought about this, like it's energy to build with. There's like friction there. Um, and I was just talking with a friend last night about relationships, and I had this okay. So this is just kind of, I don't know where I'm going into here, but
Let
like
it flow.
let's
Let
go
it
there.
flow, Pisces.
um so like, everyone has a different life obviously, but at some point in our lives, and sometimes as we get older and mature, we end up experiencing connections with people. Maybe I'm not saying it's a significant other, but we begin to experience being in relationship where um, somebody truly um, allows us to be, or like holds space for who we are, who considers us, who loves us. And there's these qualities that are like, wow, that friendship or that connection is so enriching. And then we realize, like, like I've had, like that's something I want to have if I'm going to have a significant partnership in my life. Like I want it to be like that. It shouldn't have to be like all like tension and turmoil. And like, so it's just kind of like thinking of this idea, but then like the reason I thought of this is because like there's the whole thing of like, and it's like, well, two things I guess to bring up is like, one, no matter what we get into, we face our own stuff, which I think you're kind of speaking to a little bit there, is like
Uh-huh.
whatever we're projecting out, whatever we're not owning, it's still going to come up. It's still our own stuff's going to come back to us like at some point, in some fashion, in some way. But then also,
Mhm.
it's like all trines and sextiles, like there's, like we kind of need some friction, we need some challenge and tension to keep things interesting, or like, I don't know, maybe the relationship's just boring. It's a little too
Yeah.
much ease. Like if we're just seeking, I was like, reincarnating as a human being on planet Earth. I mean, I guess this is I don't really, it doesn't seem like the goal is to just seek the easiest path and everything. Like
Yes. Yeah. I feel like some people reincarnate on this life. They want to have an easier life, an easier physical manifestation. And that's totally fine. That's up to them. That's their choice. That's their soul pact. And but there's of course there's gonna be less growth. And if you want a harder life, or someone reincarnates with, developmental disorder, or they have a terrible accident or something like that, it's time. Like this is Saturn suffering. I was saying this with my mom the other day, because this is a helping profession, right? So one of the key things, I have a very strong Saturn. I have Saturn in Capricorn. I'm always thinking about boundaries. And yes, I want to help. I love helping, but someone has to be ready. In a way, if I can know if they're ready or not, is how do they respond to suffering? Are they stubborn about it, or has suffering taught them that, like, it's kind of the Saturn archetype, to work within your limitations? Like, the suffering is teaching you that these are your finite limitations. Now, are you just going to keep resisting? Okay, you're going to keep suffering. Saturn is happy to keep you suffering forever and ever and ever. All right, now if you're going to work within those limitations, you can actually find freedom. They can find freedom through this discipline. And speaking more to your, like, relationships, I forget where I read this, but it was early in my astrology career, where it's like, if you have a relationship that's just a bunch of sextiles and trines, it's more often just going to be a friendship, because there's not enough friction to stir attraction, right?
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I find squares and oppositions are extremely important. Where, like, Jason Hawley says something that always resonated with me, where he's like, well, people come to counseling astrologers because they think that it's their oppositions and squares giving them trouble, but it's really their trines aren't working. And I fully agree with
Hmm.
that, because to deal with, obviously, life will always give you challenges. To deal with struggles, I feel like the best way, or at least a starting point to deal with struggles, is to, how can I use my strength to ameliorate this struggle? I can't necessarily get rid of it, but am I using my strength well enough, wisely enough, cleverly enough, adroitly enough, to at least mitigate the suffering long enough to figure out how to work within the suffering? That's all your trines. Those are your natural
Mm-hmm.
gifts, because the natural tendency of the trines and the sextiles is to be lazy and to sit on them.
Mm-hmm.
But then you kind of learn through the oppositions and squares that, oh, if you work with this is really constructive energy, which you have to work at it. Like, I have a Mars Saturn square in my chart, which is, oh, the worst thing you could have. Like, oh yeah, it's really difficult at
Uh-huh.
times, and I hated it. I just would start things. I came from my Mars and Aries. I would start things all the time, but I would never finish them. And then I finally had, like, at 25, I was like, yeah, I'm not fulfilling my potential. So it's time to come for my Saturn. And I still suffer where I'll start things. I'm much more picky in what I start, but inevitably, when I'm getting to the end of something, it's a lot harder. Like, shit, just, it's both harder psychologically, and then also, I guess, I project that psychological tendency onto the world, because then I experience more obstacles, like more concrete obstacles. And it's like, how badly do you want this? Did you truly think about how difficult it may be to finish this when you started it? Oh, if you didn't, then you didn't want it bad enough, right?
Yeah, that I mean, Saturn in Cap with Mars and Aries square that's just like archetypical crises of exactly what you're speaking about. I mean, I've definitely, like, it's so interesting because I've definitely I had some readings with people where, like, I look at the chart and, like, oh, you've got Saturn in Aries or something, or like Saturn in Aries in the first house or whatever, like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, so, let's talk about, this whole psychology of, starting things and completing things. And, like, and at least, and some of those people that I've met, they're some of the psychological struggle is this thing of, like, I'm starting again, and it's like, this society has kind of drilled this whole thing in our heads, in our subconscious. I don't know, like, somewhere, like, it's like, like, success, like, what you want, and then you go for it, and then you, like, achieve and accomplish within that. And so it's like, well, if you're 20, 30, 40, and you're starting over for the 15th job, like, how do you psychologically reconcile this as you, hey, maybe this is my unique path in this lifetime? It's like, I think about that a lot. Is like, at what point do we psychologically kind of, like, embrace and accept? I was like, wow, this actually was part of what this lifetime is about, in a way that's healthy. Because the other thing I think about that with, because Saturn time, in evolutionary astrology, we talk a lot about how it does correlate with resignation. And so I think, like, when we're young, we have hopes and dreams, we have a vision of what this lifetime is going to be about, and we project that onto the future. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great to have goals. I mean, it's like, I still have goals I had 20 years ago, and I'm still heading towards those goals, you know? And um but like I guess what I'm getting at is something happens in the psyche at a certain point as people age where there's this like, okay, I'm accepting that this is my life. And I think that what's interesting is that edge of how much is that acceptance have resignation about you're giving up your hopes and dreams, or or is it pure like I accept everything that has happened up to this point in time and I'm going to continue to work towards my hopes and dreams. It's hard. It's not easy.
Yeah, yeah. Saturn's the hardest planet, if you ask me, anyway. And that's I'm because I have such a strong Saturn. So my ruling planet is Venus. Venus forms an angle with Saturn. So in an direct way, I embody Saturn. Like I speak up for Saturn. Like one of the things I read early in my career was that whenever Saturn aspects a planet, or especially aspects of benefic, he sucks it up. Like you think of Saturn as so starving for life and for sustenance that he's like, oh, Jupiter, Venus, oh, sun, moon, oh, you're here, okay, you're all mine, you're all mine. And then the sun
Wait,
and the moon, or Venus and Jupiter, are like, oh shit, like what the fuck, like
what house is your Saturn?
okay. Fourth whole sign, third quadrant, third Placidus.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I had to suffer a lot in my 20s. I suffered so much. It was like squandered potential. I just I had everything, and then I was like, oh fuck it, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, and and through that pain, I finally realized I just need to go through Saturn, because yeah, Saturn gets a bad rap, but one thing that I really resonate with is that Saturn will keep you safe, and keep you safe in a way that delivers your ambitions, delivers you enough sustenance. Because yes, Saturn is correlated with deprivation, but he gives you just enough to survive through the deprivation. Like you have just enough to persevere, just enough to persevere. And when you approach mastery, or when you achieve mastery on Saturn's terms, then you get the blessings of Saturn. Like you don't know when they come though. This is like this divine timing. Like I love Saturn, the ruler of timing and karma. You don't know when it's gonna come. So like, have you internalized the discipline and the perseverance and the time management? Because that's really what Saturn. Because the one thing I talk a lot about Saturn is what's your minimum effort? What can you do on a minimum daily level? Like whatever that is, that's what Saturn wants from you, like every single day. And over time, you will build that up to more and more and more. As we say in yoga, that the practice stays the same, but you get better, right? That's life. Life stays challenging, but you just get more able to withstand the hardship. That's the Saturn. So Saturn gets this bad rap, but I'm like, no, you want to go through. If you go through the most difficult thing, then of course Venus and Jupiter are easy. Right? What the heck? You don't really have to try that hard for them.
That's interesting because I while you were talking about that, where I was going was this whole concept of, um, I guess, belief and faith a little bit, because, in the sense of, it's like, what does someone believe, or, like, what does somebody think that, like, is it really going to change? Like, if you have a psychology that you don't believe that all your efforts are going to make a difference, like, and like things are the way they are, um I don't know what I'm getting at here. There's like like, one of the things I've been playing with, and it relates to this in some way, is, um a lot of people have, some belief that like hard work pays off. Okay, that's a belief, or it's a knowing or a faith, or however we want, whatever we could say, call it a lot of things, right? But
Mhm.
this idea, and then there's this idea of karma, and so we, where it's like, why am I experiencing what I'm experiencing? Well, there's some karmic reason why. Does it make sense to me? I don't know. Maybe it will in time. So there's these things and ways that we try to make sense of hardship and the challenge that we face, or the mountain we have to climb. um and I guess I've been thinking about it in the sense of, like, what motivation, if somebody doesn't believe in reincarnation or karma in a larger sense, or have any spiritual lens, like, what is the motivation in this life to put forth the effort? I, I don't know.
Okay, no, this is
It's
great.
kind of a hard
So
question I'm
there's
throwing at you here, but
no, that's great. There's a couple of things. So BKS Iyengar in the Tree of Yoga was asked this very same question, and obviously it stuck with me. And BKS Iyengar is like, you don't have to believe in God. You don't have to have any kind of faith. You don't even have to believe in yoga. Do you believe in yourself? Like, do you believe that if you make some kind of action to better yourself, that it's possible for you to better yourself? Like, if you believe that, then yoga's for you. It's kind of simple as that. If you don't believe that, then I'm not a licensed therapist. My amateur opinion is that you are clinically depressed, or right. We need to look into. So I would look at that as, and this is kind of from Liz Green's The Sportist. That's like a defeated Mars. Your Mars and your Sun are defeated. You don't have a sense that you, like you as in your desire, your libido, your will can impact the environment. All right, that's fine. Everyone's entitled to their beliefs. Where did that come from? Let's go back. You know what I mean? It's probably when you were younger, you exercised your will on some level. You know, Mars is a 2-year cycle, maybe like 2 years old. Where you tried to exercise your will and you were defeated, like by the parental gods. Something was like no, and you internalize that, and psychologically you meet that repeatedly because the psyche always wants to heal. So the psyche will keep giving you the same situations because not because it hates you or is punishing you, but because it's like redemption. Hey, redemption arc. All right, second one, third one, fourth one, right? You're the hero of your own journey. That's the sun, right? Okay. You failed last journey, right? We're gonna do it again, right?
yeah, I mean, just saying that too is so appropriate for the Venus retrograde in Leo that we just went through, right? Um, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And while you were originally saying that, I was thinking a lot of Saturn and Pisces, because one of the things I want to mention is when you were mentioning Saturn and Aries, you know, we're seeing that generation, the Saturn and Pisces, obviously going through their Saturn return since March 7th, 2023. And February 14, 2026 will kick in the Saturn return of anyone born with Saturn and Aries. And especially, we talked a little bit off the recording about, as any astrologer knows, that Saturn return will have Saturn and Neptune conjoining at 0 degrees of Aries. Like, that's gonna be hell of a Saturn return.
Yeah, that's some Saturn return.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I've tried to
Well,
think a
okay.
lot about.
So
Mhm.
so what could we say if somebody's out there and they've got a Saturn in early Aries? Like what can we say for them knowing that they have that coming up besides like good luck, you know?
My go-tos whenever it comes to Mars or Aries, I always ask, how are you working out? What's the last time you worked out? Because Mars and Aries, it is vitalized by extreme effort. So sweat it out, feel alive. Working out is the safest thing. Like, it's very narrow. Like, it's like one of the only things that really works for Mars, but it works 100%. I guarantee you, it'll always work. So find what works for you in that area. Like, it could be boxing, it could be yoga, it could be swimming, it could be weight training. It doesn't matter. Just something that, again, with the Saturn concerted effort, what's your minimum effort you can put into working out entirely on your own? It has to be completely selfish. Just what makes you happy. And so that's why I say, you know, experiment, have a playfulness, because this is all about you. Really, this is getting in touch with self-empowerment is what works for me and nobody else. As this is especially important and powerful for people that have a lot of other energy in their chart, like Libra, Pisces, Cancer, dominated energies, or seventh house energies where they're like kind of sacrificial lambs for their family or for their partner. Okay, be more selfish. And for the Saturn part, I do ask, how do you finish things? You know, if they have a degree, or if they have a job, anything, because Saturn loves societally approved certifications, societally approved stamps. So anything that they've ever accomplished on a societal level that is like permanent, okay, you've done it once, assuming you've done it once. So tap into that same energy. Yeah, I'm sure, like, because anyone who's ever done something like that, you know, you had a house, you have a child, anything that's like a permanent commitment, it's challenging. Duh, it's challenging. So tap into that same energy. Or even if, let's say, no one has any of that, like no one's like, oh, I have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, you brush your teeth. I mean, that's the very classic astrology Saturn energy. Okay, nobody likes brushing their teeth, but how regularly do you brush your teeth? Okay, start there. Teeth are ruled by Saturn. That's a daily discipline. Start there, and you slowly build over time. Because I find with Saturn dominant individuals, there's tons of perfectionism, likely associated with tons of guilt and shame, where nothing's ever good enough.
Yeah. 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 It's a, and okay. I mean, I love that. Thank you. That's,
Well,
that,
thanks for asking.
yeah, that's good. It's helpful. I'm going to throw another perspective into the mix too, which is something I've been thinking about a lot. That my last my last podcast, I kind of was just a little bit of rambling on about this, but the whole idea that um, Aries in evolutionary astrology, Aries is this like what's emerging, like what are we becoming? Like it's totally new, it's totally emergent becoming,
Yeah.
and yet we talk about desires all the time, and a lot of our desires are something that's very familiar. So it's like, is that really like an Aries desire? Are we in a state of becoming because we're just doing the thing we already did? And so kind of playing
Yeah.
with this, like, what does it mean to Saturn define your entire reality and existence
Mm.
by just being in this state of becoming? And I think that is challenging because the nature of Saturn and consciousness, like if somebody's consciousness is like, my life path is to work within the mainstream culture and the parameters that exist there, it's kind of a hard bill to receive, a Saturn in Aries, but that's what your soul's signed up for. So like the question is, there's still some element of what's emerging in your reality that you can kind of shift, maybe, like, I guess, shift how you see reality, as it's constantly in a state of becoming. It's not this just like concrete solidified, all concrete's gonna, Neptune, Pisces, it's gonna erode, it's gonna break down, it's gonna go sand and back to the ocean. Like it all eventually, it's all temporary, but then like in smaller and bigger cycles, new things are constantly emerging. And so I think that's the trick with Saturn and Aries, is how to tune into it, because it's like if you're having your Saturn return and it's in Aries, like what's emerging now, like now what's coming forth into your reality and consciousness, and allowing the new thing to come forward. It's new.
So two things come to mind. First, well, three things. One, the first thing I would say, whenever I see a really difficult archetype in the chart, I give them space to feel how challenging it is. Like I label it, I honor it. I'm like, oh, Saturn and Aries, this is a really difficult energy. I'm sorry to give you bad news, but it's always going to be a challenging, difficult energy. It's probably never going to come naturally to you. Um, in traditional astrology, Saturn is in fall in Aries. Saturn represents death and distance, while Aries is the sign of the sun, which is life force. Like Saturn is exalted in Libra. Saturn is actually the All-Mutant ruler of Libra, and All-Mutant is essentially you add up the points of dignity that a planet has in a sign. And so Saturn has triplicity, which is worth 3 points on, like, this is like the William Lilly scale, which is just like a nice, I don't want to say beginner because William Lilly is a famous, amazing astrologer, but we'll go with that. William Lilly scale, Saturn has 3 points of triplicity in Libra, and it's also exalted, so it gets 4 points. And um, he has more energy, he has more dignity there than in Capricorn, like, or in
Hmm.
Aquarius. And Saturn in Libra
Interesting.
is really powerful, but Saturn in Aries is not very powerful. So the second part, like if this was an actual client, well, we just had the most recent Mars Jupiter conjunction at 4 degrees Aries. I know this because I just did this for my horoscope. When the Mars opposition, so Mars will oppose Jupiter around like October 15th or something like that,
Oh,
and
okay.
that's the halfway point of the Mars Jupiter cycle, which is about 12 to 13 months. So I looked back and I was like, oh, when did they form their conjunction? Because Mars retrograded in Gemini from October 2022 to January. So it's like Mars hasn't really gone anywhere since that conjunction. Well, it was, I'm pulling it up, but it was May 29th, 2022 at 3 degrees in Aries,
Okay.
the Mars Jupiter conjunction. So look at that 2-year cycle. It's not yet done. It finishes in like August of 2024 or something. I'm a little, I like to be exact, so let me get the
Sure.
exact
Yeah.
date. It finishes October 13th. Oh, excuse me. I don't know why I got October. It finishes August 13th, 2024. So that process is still unfolding. So ask ourselves, one, where's Mars in our chart? What sign is it in? That's our natal way of becoming, of what's emerging. So you, Mars in Capricorn, you're going to be slow and steady. Slow and steady wins the race, right? Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Mars gets cooled down in Capricorn. It's like, all right, I intrinsically know that in order to finish things, I need to measure my efforts. I need to practice temperance, and I'll win because Mars wants to win. Mars is victory and courage. That okay. So if that's what it takes to win, I'll do what it takes to win. Okay, well, wherever your Mars is, how you have to get a feel for how you express that, and then look at the houses that your Mars rules. And Aries in traditional astrology, Aries and Scorpio co-ruled, Scorpio for modern or whatever. All right, what's emerging in those houses? What's new? What do you want to be emerging? For me, it's 7th house, whole sign, relationships. What new relationships are emerging? Am I breaking free of these old patterns of, okay, Mars, Aries, 7th house. Okay, I would look for patterns of domination. Or am I being too dominating? Am I being too impatient? Am I coming on too strong? Am I not giving enough air for someone else, for someone else's individuality to hold center stage? All right. So this, because Mars Jupiter can really be extremely dominating and overbearing. How am I doing with that? Did I learn these lessons? Because hopefully that's what Mars retrograde taught us. Like, am I learning these lessons? Like, all right. And that's why I pay a lot of attention to Mars and Scorpio. Because whenever a planet is in domicile, it's like, how are you doing? You should be getting rewards when this planet's in domicile. If you're not getting rewards, you're doing something wrong, right? You're not working with that archetype.
So anyone who has Saturn in Aries, Mars is really prominent in their chart because it's ruling that Saturn in Aries, right? So it's like, especially as they come into that Saturn return, looking to what Mars is doing is going to give more information.
Yeah, one of the classic things, and I can take this from my own experience, Mars Saturn square, shortcuts. Mars loves shortcuts because Mars is impatient. I find Aries energy works best in dramatic, short, intense bursts of activity, and then needs to take a nap. So if you, again, like whenever we have difficult energies, there's not a lot that works, but what works really well. So you don't have a lot of choice, but if you just accept that you don't have a lot of choice and use what works, then you're fine. So if you can accept, okay, Aries, wherever Aries is in my chart, I'm going to get tired really quickly. Are you giving yourself time for rest? Or are you looking for shortcuts? If you're looking for shortcuts, Saturn is going to bitch slap you. I'm sorry, but that's exactly what's going to happen. Over and over and over. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You're in jail. So then finally, Mars has to submit. Like Saturn owns you. Saturn will put you in jail. Like,
it's funny that Mars in Capricorn is, you know, in a strong position, but then Saturn in Aries is like
yeah,
challenging.
yeah. It's like Mars is trying to speed up Saturn. You ever try to speed up like a Taurus?
Yeah, I have.
Well. Yeah, that's
Fun.
like you try to
Loads
speed
of
up
fun.
Saturn. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on a more like holistic level, like on a more collective level, I look at Saturn and Aries have an extremely significant role for our social collective, where Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn breaking down these old structures. Let's break them down. Okay, who's going to rebuild them? Well, Saturn and Aries. You're rebuilding things. Can you it's a lot of trial and error. Oh, okay, let's try this. We haven't tried this in a while, or let's try this in a new way. is this sustainable? Oh no, it's not sustainable. Okay, Saturn Aries is probably really good at tearing things down and saying, you know what, it's not going to work. Yeah, we put in a lot of effort or money in it, but who cares? It's a sunk cost. Let's not sunk cost fallacy things. Let's try something new. Okay. Oh, now they're not going to be the best ones probably at fully sustaining it. I look at kind of like stepping stones. Like they might start out something that has a lot of potential and they accomplish something and then they might get a little bored and they're like, okay, what's the next challenge I can take on? Okay, then let someone else sustain that. Maybe Saturn and Taurus is going to be better at sustaining that and seeing it
Mm-hmm.
to its completion.
Oh, and you know, it's like just another like spin on things too is like the whole idea that everything evolves through its polarity, that we play with that a lot in evolutionary astrology. And so maybe that's something that you haven't done out there. But like, I mean, I don't, I mean, I have Saturn in Leo, and I actually haven't paused that many times to be like, what's my Saturn polarity? And like, what does this mean with the reality that I'm creating, to evolve into that polarity? And of course, for Saturn and Aries, we're looking at the Libra polarity, and so you know, it's like in a way the polarity gives us a little motivation, because it's like, you know, the reality that's emerging is like, well, you know, what does that give other people, and how does that serve society or at a social level? Because it's like there is value in what's emerging, and so to think about how it's serving something greater than just self evolves it gives it more of a motivation. It's not just like coming purely from, you know, it still comes from within the individual, but it's like connected to something else immediately. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that Aries energy will need to tap into the generosity. Like this, don't air all sun, I mean, excuse me, all fire signs have the capacity to be extremely generous. Like it's just, this is yours. Yeah. Don't ever mention it. Who cares? So can Aries just give that away to society and not be like, oh, hey, you don't know that I came up with this, right? This is my copyright. Because Libra is like, is this fair? Is this a fair contract?
Yeah, Saturn and Aries, like all bringing forth all this new things, but maybe didn't get the patent.
Yeah.
But is that, you know, like that's the kind of like what's quote wrong, or like a failure? Like who decides that? You know, who? So it's like, yes, because it is Saturn. You know, it's like we kind of have to face that definition as it emerges from within ourselves, and say like, well, what if I say
Yeah,
it's not that?
as you say that, emerging new leaders, like new permanent leaders coming to mind. So I just read
Mm.
I follow this AI, like a couple of AI emails to stay on, you know, with the whole Pluto and Aquarius. I want to stay close to the development of AI. And Walter Isaacson, the famous great biographer, he did Steve Jobs and a bunch of other famous people that I don't remember. He has an article. He's on the front page of Time this week for his biography on Elon Musk that comes out on the 12th. And then, you know, that's, to me, I look at like Elon Musk, or to a lesser extent, people may not know this name, but Andreessen Horowitz, or Mark, no, excuse me, Mark Andreessen. Andreessen Horowitz is the name of the A16Z venture capitalist, like the #1 venture capitalist firm in Silicon Valley. So Mark Andreessen, he was the co-creator of Netscape, which is the modern public development of the internet. That was the first web browser, which just finished its Saturn return. That was 1994, you know, Saturn and Aquarius. So I look at these new tech billionaires, you know, obviously Jeff Bezos. Wouldn't be surprised if at some time he decided to run for president, or Musk, or one of these, you know, people tried to run for president, because there are new leaders. You know, we kind of like, yeah, Elon Musk is, if you look at like Twitter or social media, there's very polarized opinions on him, like a lot of like mudslinging. But whether you like it or not, like this dude runs 6 companies. He runs Tesla. He runs. He was so like the article, the Isaacson article talks about how a decade ago, Musk was talking with Sam Altman, who's now he's the leader of DeepMind. I believe that's right. Please feel free to double check me. Which is where OpenAI. turned into OpenAI, which is
Hmm.
like ChatGPT. That's where ChatGPT came from. And Musk was
Hmm.
talking with Sam Altman like a decade ago, saying like, okay, how do we? Because like the conversation was like, oh, potential threats to human life, potential threats to human consciousness, and Elon Musk was like, well, artificial intelligence. Like that's a potential threat. What safeguards do we have against AI? And that's what Musk is all about. And anyway, he ended up disagreeing with Altman. So Google came in and bought out Altman, or they're heavily invested in him. So it's kind of like Google and Microsoft are these proxies in the AI war. Like they have their guys, their products. And so Musk was like, okay, you're not, I don't feel like you're putting in appropriate safeguards or you're thinking deeply enough about this product. So I'm going to jump into the fray. And so now he's using Tesla, for example. He's like, well, Elon Musk, we're behind on a chat bot. We're nowhere close to Chat GPT, but we have Tesla. We've been trying to get out of self-driving cars forever. So we have a bunch of images, bunch of AI images every single day, like billions and billions and billions. So we can feed that into an Android, to a robot, where then we're ahead of the game as far as it comes to maybe creating a robot that can live in the world and navigate the physical world, where ChatGPT is nowhere close to that. So you see this arms battle
Hmm.
going on, like this Aries energy jockeying for position, who's going to be the top dog.
That's interesting. Gosh, I mean, that's a can of worms. We are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to keep us to an hour today, and we're got a few minutes, so we're getting close to wrapping up here. Um, but yeah, Aries, and obviously Aries, most of us know Aries does correlate with leadership, and so and Saturn society, so new leaders in society, in mainstream culture and reality. And then with that Neptune conjunction too,
Mm-hmm.
that's interesting. You could even see some new spiritual leaders emerge potentially with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that, like within myself, this is kind of a heavy thing to end on, but we'll just like see where we go with this. But in myself and in others, I've noticed a little bit of this like projected fear on this coming Saturn Neptune conjunction in Aries. And we know that Uranus is going to be going into Gemini. And there's kind of like this sense of like, oh, like we're in this kind of Piscean lull, and then things are going to be more like Aries, like more war, more, fighting, more conflict at that time. And so there's kind of this oh, that time's coming. And so I say that though to be like, let's like take a moment to sit with that, like maybe even like first, yeah, let's acknowledge that a lot of us might have that, but then, like, okay, so what do we do? Like, it's not really great to just keep going with this projected fear on the astrology of the future, so it's like what are some of your thoughts and I guess like strategies for how to shift consciousness around that.
Two things come to mind. As one, admitting that as astrologers, it's very common for us to one try to play God and connecting to that, catastrophize the symbols that we see. So it's worth reminding ourselves that we're seeing every single symbol is an expression of infinity. In our finite human minds, we can never approach infinity. All we can hope to do is is be as creative as possible, which would be my second point. How creatively are we thinking about the archetype? So if we are catastrophizing something, that is in and of itself proof that we are not being creative in how these archetypes can manifest. Right?
We're like, yeah,
Yeah.
we're thinking of it in terms of like one way, the worst way it could.
Mm-hmm.
Doomsday
So
astrology, the horoscope.
I know, right? So that would be the best way I could summarize that in like a 2 minutes. So
Yeah.
challenge with Saturn Neptune, images come to mind. Use the power of visualization. Visualize what what would we want to see? What we could see, spiritual leaders on earth are ourselves embodying our own spirituality, where we're, this is like a new age science where what if we're able to instantly connect, and like we're all uploaded to what's Musk's AI thing, like putting Neuralink, but we all have like Neuralink and we are the singularity, like AI, like humans merge with AI, and then it's like we're all like these extremely powerful beings that it becomes transparent, like Neptune's transparency. So if there's like, to me, transparency is the perfect remedy for power, right? Because like power thrives in secrecy. So if we have transparency in a
Hmm.
society, then I know what you're doing before as soon as you think of it, right? Before you can even fully implement it and get enough people on board. So then what happens? Then maybe then there's like paradise or more utopian possibilities. Like, let's have freedom to create with that. Like, let's ask other people's opinions, because of course Saturn's going to be like, oh, scary, bad, control, keep it locked down. That's because Saturn's afraid of the infinite potentials that Neptune inherently symbolizes.
Yeah, but can Saturn even control with Neptune, in a conjunction with Neptune? Like it's almost
Absolutely
like
not.
right,
Especially
right.
not in Aries. It has no power in Aries. No, you're going to be overwhelmed. The
Neptune
oceans flood. Yes.
like
So
uh,
it might be like these AI overlords try to control us top down, and then like the sun has a massive sunspot and all technology overnight, like none of our cell phones even work anymore, and like bam, we're in the stone ages. Oh, you didn't plan for that, huh? Now what?
I I was at the store yesterday cashiering, and someone came through my line, and she was just like going on about, like how everything's all crazy these days, and she's like, yeah, I just think that the internet's gonna break. And I was like, I thought, can you, like, what do you mean? Like, can you say more about that? Like what, like how would that work? How would that happen? And she's like, I don't know, I just think that, like it's gonna break. And I'm like, okay. And then I'm hearing you say this, and it's interesting because it's like, um, yeah, we don't know. I mean, and and I think that to project the version that we fear on something that we don't know is not creative, like you said. That's a really great strategy, and and to own our own power in it, right? I mean, like, right, what you're saying is to be creative is to say, like, we actually know, it science has proved that, like, it's like the butterfly flaps its wings, like we all have ripples in consciousness that affect the larger collective. Like, you may not realize the impact that you have, but you do. And I think, like, getting back to like Pluto and Aquarius, I think that like those kind of like waves of grassroots awarenesses and shifts that we might be experiencing with that, it's going to be interesting times for sure. And it's unwritten in a way, so yeah,
Hell
to
yeah. The holographic universe. You ever read that book by Michael Talbot? That's
no.
what comes to mind with Saturn Neptune. That
Hmm.
holographic, maybe there's more of an acceptance that this is a holographic universe and that we
Hmm.
are all just part of collective unconscious, collective consciousness. And if I'm you and you're me, it serves nothing for me to hurt you because I hurt me.
Hmm. Well, I mean, that's what I always say when you say holographic universe. I always think like that's what I say. What astrology is like. It's not like the planet's not doing something to you. It's literally a holographic cosmic mirror. Like, it doesn't make any freaking sense whatsoever. But yeah, for some reason, that outer reflects this reality. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. It's
Uh
it's it's,
huh.
it's actually holographic. Like, that's what we're doing here, is we're studying the science of the holographic universe. That's
Yeah.
astrology.
That's right. That's a great thing to end on. So thank you for having me. Really quickly, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at astrology osiris. Website is coming soon. It'll be osirisastrology.com. Give me a month or two. And I know this is just the beginning of something amazing. We've talked for years about working together. So
Yeah, it
I'm
was.
excited.
Thank you. Yeah, it was as always. It was just a great time to hang out and talk together, and I'd love to do it again with you. So if you're willing to come on again,
Oh yeah, definitely.
good times for sure. Okay. Thanks for tuning in. Till next time.
Definitely. Peace.